Howdy folks. Today we're going to be talking about objects. Now objects are a really useful tool in JavaScript that helps us store data in a way that makes it really easy to retrieve. Let's get started. So what is an object? Objects, also known as maps or hash maps, are essentially a map from a key to a value. So you can see on the right here I have an example of an object which has 3 keys and 3 associated values. If you know the key, it's really fast to look up the value. Keys are strings or anything that can become a string. So you can use a number as a key, you can use a Boolean as a key, but JavaScript is going to convert that to a string for use. The value can be anything, any variable. It can be a string, a number, function, object, whatever. Now, objects under the hood use a hashing function to figure out where in memory a value goes. So essentially, when you put in the key, there will be a complicated algorithm that figures out and turns that into a number. And based on that number, it says, oh, this goes here in memory. And that's why hash maps can look up data so fast, because based on the key, they know exactly where in memory it is. So let's see how we would create an object in JavaScript. We start off like we do every variable. We give it a name. OBJ is usually short for object. Equals, and similar to when we create an array, we use the square brackets. In objects, we use curly braces. So you can see those curly braces there. Now, like an array, we can start an object out with some keys. So to do that, you type the name of the key, a colon, and then the value. Just like you would if you were assigning a variable. But in this case, it's actually a variable that's part of this object. So let me add a couple more, and they're separated by commas, just like an array. Right? So you can see it's similar to creating an array, it's just it has a key on it as well. And I forgot what the other one was. Oh. Alright. It's also common, just like with arrays, that if you have these, leave a comma on the end. You don't have to. JavaScript doesn't need it, but it will also accept it. So let's console log this. And you can see it prints out just like this. You might notice this is very similar to JSON, except in JSON the keys have to be in as quotes. So there we go. Well, how do we get a key out? Similar to an array. So let's console log here just to get that. You put the name, object, and then square brackets. And then instead of, well, there's 2 ways actually, so we'll go the first way. Instead of an array index, you give it the actual key as a string. So if I have my object name, you can see there it is. The other way with objects is you could just use a dot. And that works if you don't have a dash in your key, or your key is something that can actually be represented this way. Same thing. If I had a key in here, let's say I had my dash address. Okay. First of all, you have to put that in quotes. You can always put a key in quotes because remember there's strings. And then I would say, okay, somewhere California. If you wanted to access that, you have to use the square brackets. Just like with an array, you can set another variable equal to a key, and then you can actually use it that way. Note that you have to do that inside the square brackets. You can't do myObject.key because that would actually look for a key called key in here. So if I run that, somewhere California. So there's the 3 ways of accessing data. Either with the square brackets here with the string, just with a dot, or you can use square brackets with a variable. So how do I put data into it? Well, kind of the same way as you do it with an array. On the left-hand side, we have the variable name, the brackets, and then a key. So I could say, what would be another good one? Shoes. True, because I do have shoes. You could also do with the dot notation, similar to how we had it up here. These will both do the same thing. Name this one jacket. Now, if I log that again, you can see those have both been set to true. Either way will work. Again, just like before, you could also set a variable equal to this and set it that way. So that would look like key like so, and you can see it updates to the new value. So what if you've got an object and you kind of want to iterate over all its keys, but you're not quite sure what keys you have? Well, there's one very important function that you can use for that, and that is there's two actually. So if you want to get all the keys, well, let me just put this in a variable. You can use object.keys and pass in your object. So you can't call myObject.keys as a function because that might actually be a property in the object itself. You have to call object.keys, which is a library method. So we put keys in here, and if I print that out, you can see that gives me an array with all the keys in it. So now I can look and say, oh yeah, there is a role. Okay, I can access that. There's also values. And what values does is very similar to the keys, except it gives you all the values as an array, which could be useful. There's a bunch of other things that you can do with objects. Bunch of other methods, but we'll get into those later. One of the things that people often wonder is how do you loop over them? Well, there's a couple of fancy ways in ES6 to do that with the for of, but we're not going to go over that right now. I'm just going to use a regular loop. Let's say I get my keys here. I can actually just loop over that like I would any array. 0 I less than keys.length I plus plus keys of I. And now if I want to get the value, I can actually look it up by saying I equals my object bracket key, because now I know the key. And let's just log those. And there you go. There's the key and the value for everything. This is very common if you've got an object. One of the other common things that people do with objects is if you have an array, which you can have an array of objects too. And let's say I wanted an array to get all the students by their name. So I could actually create an object that has the name as the key and then the student data as the value. So let's take a look at how that would work. So I'm going to do something a little complicated here. I'm going to make an array, and each value of that array is going to be an object, which is totally fine. Just like you can nest an array in an array, you can nest an object. Okay, so now I'm just going to put some names in here. And maybe I want to get an object with all of these things in it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this this loop like that. I'm going to say, all right, students by name. You don't have to call it this. I just kind of like to call variables where I've got it's an object that is referencing an array by one of the values. And then I'm going to loop. Oops. I less than object.keys. Oh, you know what? Actually, it's not object.keys, is it? Because students is just an array. Student equals student I. And then I can say students by name, student.name equals student. And now if I console log that out, you can see now it's an object with all of those objects listed by name. So if I need to access a specific student, I can do that very easily. There's Lisa. So objects, let's talk about them, summarize them. You create them similar to any other value or variable, but you have a curly brace, open and close. To put parameters into them, you have the name, the key, which can be in quotes, colon, then the value, which can be any value, string, number, whatever, separated by commas. I'm just putting these on new lines to make it look pretty. You don't have to put them on new lines. To access, you can either use it with square brackets and the string key, or dot key, as long as it's valid for that, or you can use a variable to access it. To change data or insert data, so you can change data just as easily. It's the same thing. So square brackets with either a string or a variable, or the dot on the left side of the equals. You can get the keys by calling object.keys with myObject as the argument. You can get the values by calling object.values with myObject as the value, or as the argument, which lets you loop over them. One common reason we do this is to turn an array of objects into an object of objects indexed by a specific field so that we can access it more easily. I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all next time.